All right, now recording, red light on. All right, hi everybody. We're back at Dorothy's Place, and I'm here with Pete, the man of the hour, who has done that thing that many of you will not be amazed to hear. He has written a book, and it is about to appear next week, right, Pete?
Yes, May 4th, it is coming out.
All right, brace yourselves. This is very cool. It's a great pleasure to talk to Pete about this because, of course, reading is a wonderful book. It's all these things we've been talking about. It. It's like some sort of deep transcription of the middle space that Pete and I live in all the time, right? So,
Yeah, I feel in many ways, I feel like this interview is home court advantage for doing book interviews because not only is this our home podcast, but this is many of the ideas emerged out of the Solidarity Hall community.
oh, that's cool. That's cool. It's wonderful where this book came from because books come from lots of different odd events. But I wanted to maybe, if you like this idea, tell us when when you did the thing that kicked off the book process, which was a graduation address at law school. You probably had a couple of ideas in your head as to what this address was and what it might look like, and what were you thinking at the time when you wrote this up, and then apparently, I would say, carefully rehearsed it and delivered it in boffo fashion.
Yeah, there were two things that kind of streams of rivers that came together to hit this idea. So the first stream was, the book is very personal, and it's about kind of every aspect of life.
Yep.
But it started kind of in my heart in a kind of grappling with political questions. So I work in my daily life on many political causes, and one of my goals is civic revival. How do we get more people involved in their communities? And what I found in that work, and when I was challenged with this opportunity to give the speech, to think up like one message, like it's kind of an interesting challenge.
Uh,
What is the foundational message? What is the Archimedean lever
oh my God.
you
Yeah.
will turn if you can get one 5-minute message across to a lot of people?
Right.
And it hit me, there's a part of you when you care about justice causes or civic revival, you want to talk about the concrete
Mhm.
substance of it. We need to fight climate change, we need to build solidarity in America, we need to do localism. But that only gets across to people at a certain level, and I wanted to go deeper than that. And the thing that hit me as the like major roadblock to all of these causes that I cared about is that there is simply not enough people working on or caring about
Mm.
such causes.
Mhm.
There are not enough people working on 10, 20, 30-year projects to advance causes about anything. There are not enough people who have committed to their towns to build up their place. There are not enough people who have committed to healing a community divide or building up a community or cohering an intellectual community like you have done with Solidarity Hall, Elias. There are not enough people working on advancing these causes. And you don't need everybody to be working on things to advance causes. Most of the biggest, as Ralph Nader likes to say,
Mm.
most of the biggest causes in history were about 1% of people.
Yeah.
But we don't have 1% of people in the various, uh, I'd say we're maybe 1/10 of the way there on many of these important causes of our
Yeah.
time. And so and then I did one step deeper on that, which was, well, what's preventing people from joining up? And I think it was this psychological aversion
Mm.
to committing to anything,
Mhm. Yeah.
to allying or subsuming yourself in anything bigger than yourself. And that is where I made the theme of the speech be about commit to something, commit to a particular thing.
Yeah.
um and so that was one river. I can stop there, or I can tell you about the
No,
second
keep going.
river if
It's
you.
good. Keep going.
So the second river was this mystery, which was just a personal mystery about my experience, a gripe with my higher education experience, both in undergrad and law school, which was, the mystery was the elders that in those institutions, when you ever had this event where older people told younger people about what to do, how
Mhm.
to think about life, how to think about your career, how to think about where to live, the number one message, it is almost the religious motto of higher education in America. Keep your options open
Yep.
was the motto.
Yep.
Um, Pick a job that will help keep your options open for future jobs. Go to a place that will help you keep your options open. Don't settle down. This is the time to keep your options open. And yet, when you looked at the particular embodied people that were worth looking up to, that were gaining respect, when you look at the older people that were like our heroes, they were all people who totally ignored that advice.
Right.
Um, and when you looked at, this is the part that really won it over for me. When you look at your peers that were earning respect,
Mhm.
they were the ones that were not keeping their options open either. It was always, I kept hearing these sentences like, oh man, you got to hand it to Johnny. He's really becoming a Brazilian jiu-jitsu, instructor. Or you got to hand it to Amy. She's really gonna join the rabbinate. You
Mhm.
know, oh, that person's really getting married at 21. They're doing it. I gotta hand it to them. That's all. They're really going for it.
Yeah.
All these phrases of praise. And what was even people we didn't like I can't stand the guy, but you got to admit he really cares about that cause or whatever,
Yeah. Yeah.
or he's a really good father or something.
Mhm.
Um, it's all because they made a commitment, and so that all came together in this fight against keeping your options open,
Mm.
this call to action for commitment, and this tribute to long haul heroes.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So many themes come together, and the idea of taking the sort of metaphor of Netflix and infinite browsing, an activity that every human being on the planet practically is familiar with, and starting through that door, that that seemed to work wonderfully well, you know?
The metaphor that's kind of at the center of the book is, yeah, as you mentioned, is this idea that it's late at night, you're browsing Netflix, you scroll through different titles, you read reviews, you watch trailers, then it's been 30 minutes, you never picked a movie, and it's time to go to sleep. And that is kind of the experience I saw with this
Yeah,
keeping your options open. And the funny thing about it, I use it as a metaphor, but it is also one of the great practical stupid lessons I've learned in my life.
ditto.
Almost every
Yeah,
single movie or show, even if they're bad, I've
yeah,
almost never I've seen bad movies and bad shows, but I have never, I think I have 100% hit rate. I have never regretted spending the
really.
last hour
Oh,
watching something, because it just, most things that get to the point of being in the Netflix choice are at least
yeah,
something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's
and
that's good.
that's kind of one of my messages in life. It's better to have something than remain on the browsing screen, even if that something was not the perfect thing
No,
to
that's
have
good.
watched or done or
That's true.
engaged
That's
with.
true. Before we dive a little deeper, I'm sort of smiling, thinking about a certain category of book buyer that will be in the bookstore and will grab this because it seems to be something about self-help. Have you thought about this?
Yes, I
Poor
actually,
Pete's got to have 12 rules for me being happier, wiser, and slightly thinner. And I can't find it. It doesn't seem to be what he's talking about.
yes, this is, I've now had two interviews in a row. I just got done with an interview with Jesuitical, and I said I can reveal my ulterior motive because it's fellow Catholics, but I, as a kind of Catholic infused, Catholic flavored podcast now, I can do
Right,
it again,
right.
which is, this appears to be a like Tim Ferriss
Yeah,
rise and grind
yeah.
book that is like, it is categorized literally in the official book categorization section as self-help.
I knew that was coming.
But
Right.
and yet I feel bad for the people that want their like 10 tips for a
Exactly.
better life, because
Exactly.
it, if you read it, the ulterior thing you will discover and be surprised, maybe this will lead to the book's demise, is it's more of like a very humanist reflection on,
Absolutely.
you don't see many self-help books where it's like, as Simone Vi says, or as Alastair McIntyre says, we must find the goods internal to practices.
No, exactly.
I sometimes get made fun of by my friends who are less into these things. They're like, what the heck are you doing with this?
Exactly. This is the self-help book that begins by telling you to get over yourself, so sort of a fun.
Yes, it's a self escape blueprint, you know.
But of course, in a larger sense, it is a self-help book if you really, take it seriously and so on.
Yes.
It's a kind of an anthology. This is the wonderful thing about it. You get into it just for a bit, and you suddenly realize this is going to be, I don't know what to compare it to exactly. It's an anthology of stories. It's an anthology of ideas. I'm thinking it's kind of like a miniature whole earth catalog for the millennial generation, in terms of all the wonderful ideas and possibilities that you throw out that people have taken seriously and dug into.
I didn't have a word for this until recently, but I've discovered that the phrase is curatorial.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like I feel that, and that's literally how. Wait 1 second.
Yep.
Wait 1 second. Oh, hold up. There was just some weird noise. I'm sorry. We can edit this out. Or okay. Hold up. Sorry about that strange noise coming from the house.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, it's, I literally put the book together by throwing kind of it's like a scrapbooking experience of, oh, this is the perfect quote for that, or this is the perfect story, or this is the perfect historic moment, and then it all comes together, and then I lather on transition prose. I'm revealing all the secrets. It's not like one of those books where it was like one idea that sprouted into a beautiful thing. It was much more, I've noticed this in 100 different places, and by seeing it all together as a collection, it might get the point across to you.
Yeah, that's good. There's a kind of a vocabulary in the book that comes out. You're redefining some words, or asking us to rethink some words. I love the phrase "depth as a superpower." Right?
Yes.
Yeah. Depth is a little bit like concentration in the midst of the attention economy, right? This is a scarce commodity, it seems, in some ways.
Yes. The example I use with depth as a superpower is the prime example is expertise. Think about expertise. It's like you spend, even in some small ways, like a year, let alone like PhDs that spend 10 years.
Yeah.
And you build up a well of knowledge in an area. And then suddenly that 1 year of doing that depth, just suddenly you become, it's like super heroic. It's like suddenly you can just, do things 100 times faster. Or you can engage with something and see very clearly what's going on. And I tell the story of my friend from my hometown who, he was a hockey reporter for the Washington Capitals, and he developed a depth of knowledge about hockey on the job to the point that he can watch a game, and you watch a game and you're not a hockey expert, and it's just a random chaos of things. Like, it's kind of pretty, and I kind of know generally you throw the sticks with the pucks and it goes in the goal, and that's a good thing, and you're trying to block or something. But he can see it, and he could be like, okay, yeah, that was icing, they're avoiding that. I know that he needs to do good on that stat because he's in the running for this, and his contract, even outside of the game, his contract negotiation is next year, but they just brought in a new assistant manager. And he tells a story of writing a game story in like 30 minutes as the game is finishing up, writing it almost and this is a double expertise. It's the craft of journalism and the expertise of hockey. And then he churns out a 30-minute story and hits send, and he's like, wow, that's it. I can now do that. And if you told me I have to write like a coherent, useful hockey story now, just as me, I'd be like, okay, give me like 9 weeks to figure it out or something. And that's for expertise, but there's a lot of other examples of that too.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. One thing that comes through when you're talking about the long haul is the idea of sustaining practices, being part of a community of practice, where you're working on something over the long term. And I was thinking about ways in which I've discovered this. Sometimes um, there's been an occasion where I have run into, or a friend of mine has run into someone who's at a very high altitude in a certain art or skill or craft or whatever it might be. And I'll give you a quick comic example, and then I want to hear your thoughts on this. A friend of mine was a singer in the lyric opera chorus in Chicago, and he told me about the night he was positioned, uh, rather surprisingly to him, next to Pavarotti.
Oh, wow.
And so he had never been near the guy, and Pavarotti came on stage, and the orchestra starts up, and the chorus sings a little bit, and suddenly he said Pavarotti opens his mouth, and he said it was like a hurricane came up. He was at a level of the game that was so tremendous. It was like a Tiger Woods thing, right? It's like this guy's just on a different planet, just blowing air out to the back of the lyric opera hall. That can show you what practice means, what the long-term kind of cultivation of something can mean.
Yeah, I that is totally what I'm trying to get across with this is that, and it's not, I'm trying to get out of that very individualized, atomized, like rise and grind
Yeah,
self-help spirit of this. It's not like you can be a master if you work at it.
yeah,
It's more this kind of human, humble aspect of it, like the beauty of this, like the beauty that, I have this part in the book where I talk about one of the pleasures of browsing is chasing novelty. It's like fun to do a bunch of
yeah.
fun, new, exciting things. But the sweetest novelties are the novelties at the other end of a long haul.
Mhm.
So the novelty of hitting the high note, the
Yeah,
novelty of mastering the course,
yeah.
the novelty of having the expertise and being able to do something off the cuff, the novelty of knowing what it feels like to be on your 10th anniversary or your child's 10th birthday.
Mhm.
That is the sweetest novelty. And if you keep browsing, you'll never be able to hit that.
Yeah, yeah,
There's this other part of sustaining practices, and my very good editor who cut out all the parts where I went deep into the types of stuff we'd love on this podcast, but more than 100 people, there's not an audience of more
I
than
see.
100
Sure.
people. I used to have this whole long section in the book on what Alastair McIntyre talked about with practices, which is, and there's some remnants of it if you go searching
Yes.
in the remaining text,
Yeah,
which is the practice of a bunch of different people, a community of people in a
exactly.
practice together. And his book After Virtue, which,
Mhm.
you can't really recommend the book because I think you got to be primed to get this lesson from it because it's
I
kind
see.
of very dense.
Yeah,
But what I took away from it, which was a really like top 10 transformative thoughts in
yeah.
my
I
life.
agree. The book had the same impact on me. I agree.
Amen. Yes. No, it's like it really is the idea that, baseball or chess or the being fellow Catholics in the Catholic Church or being fellow Texans or
Mhm.
beauty pageants, any of these, or the idea of brunch, any of these cultural institutions that have elements and substance to them, they are sustained by a community of people continuing to maintain and steward them over time. And it's almost like a constellation of meaning that each star in the constellation needs to do its part to bring it all together. And if the stars kind of all disperse, the spirit that the constellation brought together goes away, the magic goes away. And I always say there is no Michael, we talk about Michael Jordan, but what Alastair McIntyre got me thinking about was the sublimity. And you can do this by watching the Jordan doc, which
Yeah.
is like an example of sublimity and
Mhm.
goods internal to practices or something. The sublimity of Michael Jordan is maintained by the scorekeepers, the high school basketball coaches,
Mhm.
the referees, the halls of fame in the Basketball Hall of Fame, the traditions of the jerseys. All of that cultural elements contributed to the sublimity of us finding it incredibly beautiful that he scored the game-winning shot in the finals or played his flu game in game 6, and not all of that would have meant nothing if the practice was not sustained.
Yeah.
And no one thinks about sustaining practices that much anymore, and how much sublimity and beauty and uh, goods are we losing by not sustaining them?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You make a point about sports and being on a team and the power of that. And a practice is a team exercise. It's part of the social, and it's part of this larger topic we come back to all the time, which is how do we recover the social, right? This missing thing between the market and the state, where there's some sort of void that we've lost cultural memory of mostly. And yet your book seems to be pointed at saying this is where we need to rebuild.
Amen. And I think it's, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is to me, sometimes it's this obsession with efficiency to achieve the single purpose that you assume something is.
Hmm, hmm,
So
hmm.
you assume, okay, the purpose of the soccer team is to host the game, and train the girls on the soccer team or something.
Yeah,
And so if you were trying to make that super efficient, you'd get rid of all the extraneous stuff and make it just about that one goal. And you can see this in a much more extreme example, like what is the purpose of a university? It's to train people for jobs. So get rid of the courses, get rid of the campus, have it online or whatever. But as, us Burkeans, with the good part of Burke, I won't take it all, but
right.
the part we like about it would say relative to the kind of hyper techno progressives, um, we know that all that other organic detritus,
Yeah, yeah,
is very important.
that's
It doesn't have just
absolutely.
one purpose. And you might think you're making everything much more efficient, but you're going to wake up 50 years from now and wonder, why is our community so cold? Why is our university so neutral? Why do people not have a spring in their step or a fire in their belly as they walk down the streets? And it's because of all those little decisions you made to get rid of the kind of magic of light, of the social,
Yes,
in the name of efficiency and all those moments in the past.
indeed. The social also is the arena of friendship, and recovering friendship as a kind of a social force. It was once true that friendship was a big factor in politics, which it's not very much anymore. Um, but sort of historically, there's a lot of reflection on the importance of friendship in a well-run polis, a well-run community. And I think what you're pointing to, dedication, if it draws you into common practice, that's where friendships are forged,
Yeah, I have this. I found all these the aside from the curatorial, kind of the value add that I'm proud of in the book
Mhm.
is I've discovered some of these interesting patterns. And one of them is that the three fears of commitment that we have correspond to the three overcoming these three fears corresponds with three of the joys and gifts of commitment,
Ah,
and dedication, and one of them is friendship. So I'd love to talk about that. So
go ahead. Okay.
one of the reasons we're scared of commitment is fear of regret,
Yeah.
which is, if I commit to this, I will wake up 20 years from now and regret that I didn't commit to something else, another person, another place, another career. But if you overcome that fear, you have the freedom of purpose. You don't have what McIntyre called the freedom of ghosts. I am not bound by anything. I have no substance. You have the freedom of purpose, something that frees you from yourself.
Mhm.
On the fear of missing out is the second most kind of well-known fear of commitment.
FOMO.
I'm happy with what I committed to, but it comes with responsibilities that are sometimes not fun.
Mhm.
I'm happy I joined this book club, but I have to show up on Wednesday at 7 on a week I don't want to, or a week that there's a cool thing happening somewhere else.
Right.
And but when you overcome the fear of missing out, you and stick with your commitment, you have the joy of depth. And that's my whole thing about depth as a superpower. And here comes the third one that kind of speaks to what you said. This is a surprising one that I think people don't think about enough, but I think is really true, especially in my generation. The fear of association.
Hmm.
We fear the chaos that a commitment will bring to our identity, to our reputation, to our sense of control. If I join a church or a synagogue or a religion, um, that will affect my identity. I'm suddenly
Yeah.
of this religion. If
Yeah.
I support this political campaign or cause, people will know me as someone who reported it, and that's reputation.
Mhm.
Control is, if I join this group, I have to deal with all these messy people that come with it. And that's incredibly messy and scary. It's chaotic. And you have to leave the security of isolation, and you have to go through the valley of chaos and uncertainty, and it will take a while before you get the deeper, more peaceful security and comfort
Mm.
of friendship and community.
Yeah.
And that is the gift at the other end of the fear of association, which is the comfort of friends. When somehow making friends, I'll just say it sucks,
Yeah.
no, but having friends is great. And
Right.
joining communities kind of sucks, but being in a community is great. And we just have to buck it up and leave our homes and go out and deal with
Yeah.
the awkwardness, and have a lot of mercy during that valley of uncertainty. Hope people have mercy for you, and you will reach the other side of sooner than you expect, of the comfort and joy of community and friendship.
Yes, that's good. That's good. You know, we get inklings of that, I think, in Wendell Berry's novels, which are not deeply romantic pastoral visions of lost America. They're dense, rich recapturings of a certain kind of society. But there's all kinds of trauma and pain and suffering, but it's in a certain kind of a shared context that reminds me of what you're just saying. So that at the end of it, it's almost a kind of beatific vision. But it was not because it was all beatific getting there, you know?
Yes, amen. And Barry plays a big role in the book,
He
and
does come
he's
up. Yeah.
kind of, I'd say he haunts the book in a good way.
Beautiful.
So,
Beautiful.
amen to that on his novels,
You know, the
and
other
he's
thing,
honest about that.
yes,
The small town life isn't always rosy.
no,
There are parts of it that are hard.
for sure. You know, the other theme in the book that I've come on to more recently, maybe you have also, or maybe we hit it about the same time, is this sort of controversy or debate around the way notions of innovation have hollowed out the practices of maintenance and care. This to me is just a mind-boggling theme. It's like one of these things like, somehow dimly I knew this was so, and now that someone has said it, I think, oh my God, this is central, you know. So feminist economists have been working on the economy of care for a long time. There's no news, to them. And so now, President Biden's talking about infrastructure, blah, blah, blah. You and I follow strong towns. Chuck Marone has some ideas about that. And Chuck is even featured in the book, The Innovation Delusion by Lee Vinsel and Andrew Russell. You mentioned them also. And I think this is just a vast territory that ties perfectly to the themes of your book. And thus it is one of the themes of your book. But it's something that I don't think, in a kind of a more shallow cultural sense, we have begun to wrap our heads around, although the pandemic is getting us there.
This is one area where I'm very curatorial, instead of kind of thinking I take no credit for this. This is,
Yeah,
and I mention it in the book,
yeah,
the great essay on this is Vinsel and Russell's
yep,
essay in Eon, Hail the Maintainers, which was, top 10 essays I've read in the last decade.
exactly.
It's a real game
It's an
changer.
earthquake. Yep,
And there's so much depth to this idea, which
true.
is, they even, and I interviewed Vinsel for the book,
Yes.
directly beyond just what he's written. And he actually said they decided to write the article after having a joke about Walter Isaacson's book, The
Oh,
Innovators.
yes.
And it was like, they were like, oh gosh, we should do a book called The Maintainers or something, and say, and try to like give them the Hollywood treatment as well.
Right.
And he said such an interesting thing. He said, if you're really serious about technology, like this is what Chuck Marone's always telling people with Strong Towns,
Mhm.
think about things as their full life cycle,
Yeah.
and think about things as the full system that goes with them. And I say in the book, like every iPhone needs a communication network, every shower head needs a water network, every Tesla needs a highway network. And all of these are interconnected. So that's across space, across time. Who fixes the iPhone? Who trains the people that, that fix the iPhone? Who puts it to, who runs all the kind of apps and software upgrades? Who does all that work? And that's something that turned me on to. And what I kind of brought this in on my book in is I talked more about human institutions,
Yeah.
which are, think of all the maintenance and stewardship of human institutions. And the example I gave in the books from my world of the law, I think about, talk about a practice. Okay. I talked about basketball or brunch or whatever. The law, you need all the people that print all of the documents, all the databases that hold all the opinions, all the judges' chambers, the literal architecture of all the law, the bailiff, the people who, and we need to appreciate all of that and say that what those people are doing matters, and their commitment to that stewardship and stewarding that well is something that we should respect and celebrate.
Yeah, that's good. You have a section of the book, which I was delighted to see, on economics. And what's the title of it? Something about options and
It's called Open Options Economics:
yes,
Money
yes.
versus Particular Things.
Wonderful. It's not in the least technical. There's no reference to the Gini coefficient or NAFTA or none of that. It's all in very approachable, kind of plain language. But I was thinking, because I don't think this has quite gotten through yet, the maintenance culture has not reached finance and investing. And what I mean by that, I want to get your thoughts on this. What I mean by that is we finance for growth, a certain kind of growth. We finance for certain kinds of industries. What we don't much care about are little localized enterprises. So thus we have two economies. We have a national economy, which works at scale, and that's the one that the VCs are supposed to help you get to, the venture capital people. But if you're down, on the local level with your dry cleaners and you're a middle-sized town, it's a battle. It's a battle anymore to find the funding, to find the backing,
Yeah.
The lifestyle business is what supports neighborhoods. And those are very, very difficult to do anymore.
There is this, I bet all you have this, Elias, and all my listeners have, all of our listeners have this as well, which is there's some paper that you read at some point that was very affecting, but I've lost track of it and I don't know what it is. So I'm gonna cite to a paper. If anyone knows this out there, please write in.
Right.
There's some paper I read that really affected me on this point, which was that it was talking about, like, I don't know if it was like 7-Eleven or it was convenience stores generally. And it was talking about that the real miracle of economic growth is not in the vanguard cutting edge technology that MIT and Silicon Valley comes out with. It's in the tinkerer's application and entrepreneur's application of that technology in practical purposes, to serve local needs. So the reason they use convenience stores or 7-Eleven is like the technology that makes the automatic doors or the scanner or the shelving or the Slurpee machine or the way of doing scheduling. There was some moment where some MIT or Caltech person like had to come up with like the invention of the grocery store scanner. It's like total cutting edge rocket science stuff in the 70s or something. But the magic is not that that was invented. The magic really comes when someone said, hey, I could use that for automatic doors, or hey, we could use that to do this in this way. And that magic usually happens at like a local state technical college, or at, at some entrepreneur industry event where someone figures out a way to localize the thing. And I just think and they said the magic of kind of American growth in the past and innovation is not that we just have these great vanguard entities, and we have good ones, like I'm citing MIT a lot. It's that it's when we distributed the technology and we made sure that there was a wide distribution of tinkerers
Mm.
and localizers and appliers of things. The mayor that reads in the journal of the vanguard idea and brings it to their town.
Yeah.
The entrepreneur that sees at the trade show there's some vanguard technology and thinks, oh, I could use that for my grandfather clock business or whatever. The restaurants that decide, oh, let's start using this new way to do the menu or whatever. And we invest too much in just the vanguard technology and not in the dissemination policy. And I think that
Mhm.
is something we definitely have to do. The dissemination of technology, but also the dissemination of capital to maintain these businesses.
Yeah.
The side of the local chamber of commerce that is not lobbying for a business friendly policy, but is rather just trying to create a community of shared practice. I think we need to double down on that. The
Yes.
people in the mayor's offices that are boosters for the regional industry and figure out ways that they can kind of, I like that message in Parks and Rec, where this kind of ironic message of Parks and Rec, that this little Indiana town can have the best park system in the world, and
Right.
that is what makes America, that's when we do have greatness as this country, is when people have these big dreams in small
Mm.
places.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
I'm sounding like Bill Kaufman here, but
You're channeling Bill, great guy. You know, I was thinking about your book when I was talking to one of my daughters. I'll leave her anonymous. She's about to graduate, and she's talented academically, and I thought might go into grad school. And she, with some hesitation, informed me that she decided she would not be, or at least not right away. And I said, "Oh, okay, all right. Why not? What are you going to do? Like a gap year?" And she said, "Yes." And I realized what she was saying as she described this gap year was that she was saying, now that I've finished these 4 years of the education for attainment, right, as you call it,
yeah.
I'm going to take a year and spend time doing all the things I never had time to do while I was at college. This was just so mind blowing to me because, I'm so old that I went to college in order to have time to think. And she's telling me, no, 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 we don't do that anymore. You have to finish college and get off the treadmill, and then you can hope to read. I thought this was just awful news. You know what I mean?
The single most fertile, this is an anecdata, but the single most fertile time, I'm 31 now, the single most intellectually fertile time in my entire life was 23 and 24. And it was
But
literally the time I read books, which was after graduating
yeah, yeah,
college.
this is
Yeah. And there is something, and I talk about that in the book. I don't know if you had a specific question about that,
no,
or
no, just but it was just so poignant, or maybe more like painful to me, to get your point about the education of achievement versus the education for or advancement versus education for attachment. Say something about attachment. What do you mean by
yeah,
education?
this is one of my favorite chapters, and I'm
Yeah,
glad I got to sneak it in and it made it through the chopping block,
good.
which
Yeah,
was, my editor sometimes is like, you have first book itis, where you want to put all of the ideas
right.
you would like, no matter if they're thematically connected or not. But but this made it through,
Good.
which is, I can start this with two stories. One is Alfred North Whitehead, the old philosopher writer, back in the day, where the great public intellectuals wrote crisply and clearly, in like with these wonderful. He's one of those. He said the goal of, I'm butchering the quote, but it's like the goal of education is that it should be religious.
Oh, yes.
And by religious, I mean it evokes reverence and duty.
Mhm. Yep.
And I just thought that was such a paradigm shift in thinking about education. So he says, and the best education out there is the one, he says, that evokes reverence and duty. And what is, and religious is the right word for you, because religio, the original like root, is to bind,
Right.
to connect you to something. Like ligaments is the same thing as religion,
Mhm.
to something that connects one thing to another. And what are reverence but and duty, but two methods of binding you? Reverence is I'm magnetically attracted to this awe inspiring thing. Duty is I feel kind of, morally connected, that I must, I'm implicated by this, I must act in response to this. And this is totally lost in when we think about education. We talk about education as something that frees you from your ligaments, like liberatory education, which I think is important. I think this is,
Mhm.
both are important, not one's better than the other. You
Mhm.
need education to say all those things you have all these attachments to, you should look at them with a critical eye.
Yeah.
And that is wonderful. And that's like a very important part of education. But I think we only talk about that. But there's another part of education that says, here are a set of ideas or causes or fields or crafts that might be worth having reverence and duty towards.
Yes.
And then you think about, on a very practical level, um, who are the teachers you love most? Some of them are the liberatory teachers that said, like, I used to think this way, and then they told me this totally other way to think.
Mhm.
But others of them are the ones that said, introduced you to nursing for the first time, or introduced you to Sherlock Holmes for the first time,
Right.
or
Yes.
you're one of my mentors, Elias, who introduced me to all these thinkers, Father Arizmendi, Dorothy Day, I learned from kind of this community, um, the first teacher that said, go check out Monty Python. You might like it. It's from back in my day. And then you come back and you go, Mr. Sharp, Monty Python's amazing. And that those are ones that are the religious teachers, the
Yes.
ones that evoked reverence. And I did goofy examples, but what about the one that said climate change is really important to work on? Or, in my life, Ralph Nader lighting a fire inside me for public interest law and justice. And that is what I mean by advancement versus attachment. Education for attachment is something that helps you make commitments, whereas education for advancement is about filling you with a tool set that allows you to keep your options open for the sake of yourself, and move up, advance, get deeper into the onion of power, and prepare until it's too late. There's nothing left to prepare to because you're on your deathbed.
Yep. Yep. That's great. That's great. Um, one other final thought. You, I noticed, did the audiobook. You did your own audiobook.
Yes, yes.
What was that like? I'm just curious what it's like.
No, yeah, this is
Book.
this is my favorite anecdote from the whole book process, because it is a goofy thing. You literally sit in a booth, there's an engineer, and then there's a director in your ear, and you read the whole thing, and then they tell you the pronunciations, and soon you discover all the things that you've only read. And I learn it's
Oh,
not Simone Weil, because the director in my ear corrects me, or
that's fun.
and you have to read. You learn about how much your throat can handle of talking,
Exactly, yeah.
and you learn about how to maintain enthusiasm for something when you're on hour 5 of a day of reading something. And the most painful thing about recording your own audiobook is, it's so funny. You just locked the manuscript right before you record your own audiobook. So,
Yeah.
you're in this rush to lock the manuscript. You're like, okay, it's the deadline. You're never happy. Okay, take it, print it, it's fine. But then they immediately make you read it out loud
Mhm.
and notice all of the sentences that could have been better, things
Oh,
that were
yeah.
phrased bad. And it's like raking you over your own creation
Right,
and
right.
seeing how imperfect you are, which is a humbling experience.
No doubt, no doubt. Just one more revision is all it needed.
Yes. Yeah, you almost want to record the audiobook, then share all your edits,
Right,
and
right.
go from there.
Wonderful. The book is entitled Dedicated: The Case for Commitment in an Age of Infinite Browsing. A wonderful effort I predict great things for it. Pete, what a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Elias. So glad to be in the interviewee seat here. It was a joy and a reminder of, I've how interesting the questions and the angles that come from this community of Solidarity
Uh,
Hall are
Great.
on things coming across the transom. So
Thank you, Pete. Good
appreciate
to
it.
hear. All right.
Thank you.
Be well. Bye all.